What's going on, y'all? It's your boy GK, and right now I'm gonna give you guys the story on why it is that I'm shutting down the Airbnbs. Right? So I started the Airbnb journey back in, I believe, the end of 2021, and it was a way for me to have another income, start another business that at that time I believed would make money. And you know, it just seemed like a good transition from the time, because I started to see the potential ceiling of the recording studio, which will go on to close in 2023. But I remember watching a podcast. It was a Earn Your Leisure podcast. I don't even know if they still are doing that podcast, but it was a podcast called Earn Your Leisure. And essentially they had this woman on there, and she was doing Airbnb, and they asked her some very specific questions that at that time I felt like I wanted to know, and maybe didn't even know that I wanted to know. But they asked her, like, from the time that you from the time that you posted your first property, how long after that did you get your first booking? And she was like, 24 hours. And the host of the podcast was like, no, I don't think you understand the question. He said, from the time that you pushed the button and said list or post or whatever it says, how long after that did you get your first guest? She's like, 24 hours. Once she said that, it was a done deal for me. I already knew this was what I was about to do. And so at that time, like I said, I had the studio. I had my own room in the studio, and I basically ended up using all of the furniture that I had in my room. So it was kind of like a very bachelor pad type of place. But essentially what I did was I started booking apartment tours on Zillow.com. And when I started booking these apartment tours on Zillow.com, I had a lot of them lined up. And believe it or not, right, the very first person I went to said yes. And it was a situation where, I don't know, like the cards, I guess, just lined up. I explained to him, like, hey, you're looking for a consistent tenant. This apartment is like really small, so you're probably not going to be able to rent it that much, consistently for that long of a term, before turnaround. And, there is a huge Airbnb market here. I'll take on all the risks. The apartment will stay clean because we have to keep it clean anyway for our tenants. So if we ever move out, it'll be moving and ready for the next tenant, yada, yada, yada. And so he ended up taking a chance on us, and he ended up, doing, starting off with a 3-month lease and saying if the 3-month lease goes good, we'll move to a 6-month. Then the 6-month lease went good, then we moved to a year. And we've kind of been in that same momentum of the renewal of the year leases since then. So fast forward from 2021 to 2020, let's say 2023, the winter of 2023, December. This is where I started to really, I would say, come in contact with my first major valley. You got peaks, this is a valley. And in hindsight, the only reason I went through this was because of the knowledge that I did not have. Like, honestly, moving forward now, I wouldn't run into these things because I know. But December 2023, we're coming down off of the slow season, off of the peak season with Airbnb. So you're literally seeing the the guest booking rate slowly diminish to 0, which is terrifying when you, at that time, I had 3, well, I still have 3, but I have 3 units of this guy that I'm paying market rent for. So that was actually the first reason why it is that I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these things, because I'm paying market rent for these units, which is fine in peak season because it's like you at least still have margins to make at least $1,000 on top of the rent money. But it really dawns on you when you're in the slow season, you get 0 bookings, and now you have 3 apartments that you're on the hook for market rent. Real tough, real scary situation. And fortunately, during that time, I caught a blessing by the name of Furnish Finders, and I was able to fill all 3 of those units, actually all 4, because I have a house as well. But right now we're talking about the 3 apartments. I was able to fill all of those apartments with tenants from Furnish Finders. And that is how I discovered that, oh, okay, I see how it goes now. I'm supposed to ride Airbnb for 6 months and put a tenant in there for 6 months. So the tenant takes care of the slow season, and then Airbnb takes care of the money-making season. But here's the thing that I did not know that nobody told me. Having these 3 units, and especially being in the same building, essentially turned me into the property manager for the building. Well, not for the building, but since the unit only has 6 units and I have 3 of those units, I'm essentially the property manager of half the building. So if anything, little small things go wrong, because I'm only a 1 staff person, minus my cleaners that I had on and off at the time, I'm really everything. I'm the booking coordinator. I'm the handyman, the maintenance man. You know what I mean? I'm all of these things. So at the first time something goes wrong, I'm the guy that has to be on site for that, right? Like I remember one time, one of my tenants called me at like 2 in the morning because the pipe had busted out in the kitchen ceiling. And I remember it being 2 in the morning and specifically thinking like, no, you gotta be lying. Like, you know, the pipe is not busted. You know, this is a joke. Where's Ashton Kutcher? This is punked. You know, for those of you that remember that. But he literally put the phone up to the water coming out of the ceiling. And it's like, dang, like this man really has water coming out of the ceiling. And so it's like, with the deal that I set up with the owner, you know, pretty much I told him I would have to be I agreed to be the first responder on pretty much my units. Now, he paid for the plumber to come out, he paid for the things to get fixed, but I had to get up out of the bed. And plus, this is my tenant Airbnb, so I'm the face. So I had to go. And of course, the tenant was mad or whatever the case. But essentially, this is when I learned that doing Airbnb, you're gonna have to still do property management the same way that you would for long-term tenants. Now, mind you, the reason I got into Airbnb is because I did not want to deal with the long-term tenant issues. You know, because I watched my grandmother do this with her tenants, and she would prefer to do that. But at that time, I'm like, yeah, I don't want to deal with long-term. I want to be able to make that money, get these people out. If I have an issue, they're leaving in 2 days. And so having to consistently be the property manager kind of showed me the actual workload that having Airbnbs would still bring. And so, you know, paying market rent, still risking the downturn of the market and being on the hook for that, being the property manager, day in and day out for all these little small things. And even with the regular tenants, it's like you still gotta, with the regular midterm tenants, you still essentially, I'm still being, no matter how you slice the pie, segued into this full-time property management gig. And I can't outsource it because I have to get the monies together. And remember, I told you in previous videos that when one thing was going good, something else was happening that was zero to finances. So it's like I did have a summer where I was able to afford a cleaner, but that's the only thing I was able to afford. And I was able to keep him until I couldn't afford him no more, you know? So with all of this being said, and really recognizing what the real workload is of Airbnb in order to make it a profitable business, a smooth selling business, I realized that it was too much work for me to put into a building that I do not own. different strokes for different folks. I know people who have 19 Airbnbs spread around locations that they don't own any of them, and they have the systems to be able to take care of these things, you know, including me. I worked as a like one of the moving guys for these people, where they just call me, they give me the stuff, they tell me what to do, and I transport from one place to another, move in, move out, whatever. But they have the systems. And so in the blueprint of the work that I felt like I would have to be on the hook for figuring out, whether it be me or whether I would have to outsource these things, I realized that it was not worth the investment to me to have to do all of these things and not own the building, you know? And by owning the building, also another advantage that I would have would be the fact that I would be able to get more margins, have a higher profit margin, because I'm not paying market rent for each of these units. I'm just paying one mortgage for the whole building, right? So all of these things just made more business sense to me. And so the place where I'm at now is that it is currently, the end of April. My leases with these 3 units end between August and October. So and I have a good relationship with the landlord. So, you know, it's not like I'm not able to call. It's not like I have to jump through hoops to get in contact with him or things like that. We have a good relationship. So essentially, I explained to him this exact same situation, and I told him basically at the end of my lease, I will be moving out. And in the process of doing that, I do have to find somewhere to put my furniture or whatever the case may be. I'm going to handle that at that time. But I told him I would ride out my lease, and then I would be turning over those properties to him. Now, one thing I do have to say is that February was one of the worst months that I've had having these Airbnbs, because as of late, because I didn't have the operating overhead to do what was necessary to get everything back on track with the Airbnbs, which is another thing that I realized you do need to have that working overhead capital to work with to cover things like cleaners and incidentals and whatever is needed to get everything back to normal. So because I didn't have this, because I'm just constantly zeroing out, I decided that I would have to put tenants in the units and just manage the tenants until I could get back on my feet enough to be able to put everything back in motion. But so I have tenants in there right now, but at this point I've realized that this is just how I feel already, so I'm going to go ahead and execute this. But even now, right now as we speak, I am pretty much an acting property manager for these 3 units. So when the tenants have issues, they call me. When the tenants have questions, they call me. When something is going wrong, they call me, and I facilitate that and decide if it's something that I can handle, or something that needs to be escalated to the owner. So it's like right now I'm kind of locked into the slave cycle of being this full-time property manager, by way of just trying to constantly climb out of this hole that I'm in, right? But February was one of the worst months that I had, because I had zero motion in the properties. I had no bookings, no tenants, nobody wanting to book the property or rent the property, and I essentially could not pay rent for the month of February. Now, all of these 3 units together equal a total rent of $47.50. So you can imagine, even on the months where I still made it through but almost didn't make it through, knowing that $47.50 would have easily got on the books like that, easily put you in $5,000 of debt. You know what I mean? This is where I was in February. This was the reality that I've been trying to dodge for a year straight. And it finally came. Nobody booked, nobody rented, and now I'm on the hook for $47.50. I think at this point I still have to pay $3,200 of that back. I paid like $1,500 or something like that already, but this is where I'm at. These are the things, these are the actual risks that you take when you're coming into trying to get into something like Airbnb and you don't have any mentor, you don't have any experience, you don't have anybody to guide you, and you're just taking your advice from a podcast that you saw, that they're only talking about some of the good things and not, you know, and to each his own. Some people probably may have never even went through these things, but when you don't know what you don't know, this is kind of how you have to learn the game, through trial and error. And I have been through Armageddon with these Airbnbs, and I'm not saying Airbnb is not lucrative, because it is, and it very much can be, but it's all about how you set it up. And at this point, I realized that I set my blueprint up not in the smartest way for my life and the life that I'm trying to live. You know, I want to be able to, if I'm going to be a property manager full time, changing doorknobs, putting in ACs, you know, dealing with pipes, waking up at 2 a.m., all these different things, I would rather do that for a property that I own, so that I know when I break my back to still make those payments, it's going towards paying off the principal on my loan, not me having to now work as a slave to pay back monies that I was not able to pay, and that is just a free $3,000, $30,000 to $5,000 going into somebody else's loan that I still have to work to, like, basically I have to be willing to be a slave for right now to put this to pay off this debt with this missing loan, with this missing rent payment. So that's essentially the reason why it is that I'm going to go ahead and shut down this whole operation and just get to a 0 point and decide if I feel like it's worth doing this from another perspective, from an ownership perspective, because I already do have to, you know, get another rental property anyway. But I just, because I need to be able to have somewhere to live myself. And I decided that, you know, we can talk about this in another video, but I decided that I'm going to go ahead and I keep saying try. I'm going to go ahead and get myself in position to buy that rental property, at least a 2 or 3 flat, if I can at least get a 3 flat, rent out the other 2, the 2, and live in one of them and live for free. So I don't know if I want to do that with the long-term tenant blueprint business model, or if I want to do one Airbnb or do both of them as Airbnbs and do the Airbnb midterm rental 6 months, you know, either way. But this is essentially where I'm at now, and why I'm getting rid of the Airbnbs that I at least have now come August and October, between August and October, and just really pulling myself out of this hole, man. You know, it's no point. It's no point in doing all this work, especially in these hard times where it's like coming across $5,000 could be a game changer in most scenarios, and now you have to pay this stuff back to a landlord, you know, and I have no issues with him. Our relationship is good. I wish him the best, and I hope that our relationship continues to thrive in business after this. But essentially for business, for myself, it doesn't make sense to do all this stuff and you're only paying off somebody else's mortgage. So that's all I got to say in this video. If you found some value in this or some insight, drop a like. If you want to hear more videos like this about random self-development, things like that, personal development stuff, and just day-to-day living as a normal individual, please subscribe. But other than that, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.